Okay, we are live for chapter three, or we're recording at least for chapter three. And I will try and make this quick and palliative for you guys. So I'm going to switch over my screen sharing. And see, we are going to slideshow. Okay, so one major contributor to foreign trade and business and management is the United Nations. And so there's 192 member countries dedicated to world peace and stability. At least that's what they say. I'm sorry, I don't necessarily agree with that as a professor. You're always inclined to make up your own mind about that, but that may not always be the case, especially considering recent news and insight between the United Nations and Israel. It's also very odd that you have an organization that has appointed Saudi Arabia to oversee the Women's Rights Council, a country that has very limited rights for women. So I don't know. I question some of the motivations of the United Nations. Ideally, they foster global business relationships and help write international law, help stabilize global economy, and their headquarters is in New York City, but with agencies globally dispersed. So, okay. Let's see. So the UN Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business. This focuses on like technical standards and norms, standardized trade documents, standards for e-data exchange, UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, investment in emerging economies. So a country like India or Tanzania, though we might consider those emerging economies. Let's see. So there's also UN agencies that focus on terrorism, crime, drugs. When we say arms traffic, we mean weapons traffic, and this could be illegal weapons. The UN Environmental Program, Climate Control Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and Sustainable Business Practices, climate control, focusing on the environment, climate, what we would probably call climate change, the fear of climate change at this point. They look into those things, and the U.S. donates a tremendous amount of money to the UN. There's also global education and health issues. The Global Compact facilitates private industry developing nation partnerships. So organizations like the UN, they are going to put effort forward to help private industry develop new relationships in other countries in order to stimulate business and economic growth. The UN also likes to focus on things like social justice, human rights, and labor rights, which is why it's odd that Saudi Arabia was put over women's rights. So what the UN can take credit for is things like when ships sail protected across international waters. There's understandings about international waters and safety and protection, things like that. Commercial airlines fly across borders and land in emergencies. The World Health Organization sets quality standards for drug names and quality. Universal Postal Union protects mail and allows cross-border mailing. International Telecommunications Union keeps airwaves unclogged and avoids radio interference. The World Meteorological Organization shares global weather data. UN Sales Convention and UN Convention on Carriage of Goods by Sea sets rights and obligations of international buyers, sellers. Okay, the UN is composed of what are known as 5 working bodies or organs. As soon as we get back to that slide, you can do it. There we go. So there's the General Assembly, the UN Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. So the General Assembly, it's 1 vote per member, and it adopts resolutions. Decisions reflect world opinion, but those decisions are not legally binding. It's more symbolic than it is anything binding, because if the UN did do those things, it would infringe upon the sovereignty of individual nations. Now, nations can adopt those policies into their laws if they choose to, but the UN cannot impose uh, those laws. The UN Security Council maintains international peace and security. 15 members, including 5 permanent members. So you may see like a UN peacekeeping force or security in a country ravaged by civil war. I think there was one in Rwanda when Rwanda was facing a civil war. The UN was there to some degree to help keep the peace. So the Economic and Social Council focuses on economic and social issues like trade, industrialization, economic development, children, housing, women's rights, racial discrimination, illegal drugs and crime, etc. The International Court is composed of 15 judges, worldwide jurisdiction, and legal decisions between national governments. The Secretariat, UN staff, there's 40,000 people worldwide, so 40,000 staff members, headed by the Secretary General. Secretary General recommended by Security Council, appointed by General Assembly. So that 1 vote per each country, and it's a 5-year term. Okay, now real quick, I may have mentioned these last week, but one of the reasons for bringing up the UN, and we're about to jump into the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, is because these 3 organizations can be great resources for you for your final. So please be browsing the UN website, the IMF, and the World Bank when you're doing research for your paper. So the IMF coordinates and enforces international monetary rules, and the World Bank lends money for development projects, so stimulation in economies. Um, so with IMS, there's this basic premise: all nations seek a workable international monetary system which transcends their conflicting national interests. And the IMF promotes international monetary cooperation, orderly exchange and payment systems, and available funds for BOP corrections. So these are just some articles of agreement that were established in 1945. The World Bank has 2 major institutions: International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and International Development Association, and 3 minor institutions: International Finance Corporation, Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, and the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. The World Trade Organization, which is another great organization that you can visit their website and get information from. Their goal is to reduce or eliminate trade barriers and restrictions among trading nations. Obviously, maybe they have a little bit more anxiety with the Trump administration in the U.S. It was established in 95. There's 153 members set and implement trade rules among nations, minimize government action against trade. So, the principles of the WTO: trade without discrimination. Freer trade through negotiation, predictability through binding and transparency, promoting fair competition and encourage development and economic reform. So these are what the WTO, these are the principles that they live by and that they try to achieve as an organization. We talk about political, legal, legal especially. What do you do with intellectual property rights from country to country, such as copyright, trademark, trade secrets, and intellectual property protection? Kentucky Fried Chicken has a recipe that they call a trade secret, and they don't want everybody to know it. With their 11 herbs and spices. And so what do you do in China with a country that doesn't care anything about intellectual property? You can go to China today and there are Jeep Cherokees and Wranglers driving around. The thing that's amazing is that Jeep has never sold a Jeep Cherokee or Wrangler in China. There's no factory. There's no retail space. There's nothing. What happened was China got a hold of a Jeep Cherokee and a Jeep Wrangler, deconstructed it, and then turned around and started manufacturing them, even with the name Jeep, because they don't care. So what do? Well, you have organizations like the World Trade Organization that hopefully steps in and helps with that property protection. So we're just European Union, and this is probably the last thing that I want to touch on with this lecture is countries committed to economic and political integration. It was established in 1993 by the ECN, the Maastricht Treaty. So the idea is that we're going to bind all of these countries together through a common currency and economy to some degree. And what we're seeing now is there seems to be more and more overreach by the EU in the sovereignty of nations, which was no surprise. People predicted that a long time ago when the EU first developed. But they're committed to this economic and political integration, so much so that Germany, at least once or twice, has bailed out Greece. Greece has gone bankrupt due to a heavy socialism and misspending of funds. And now the rest of the EU countries have to bail them out to some degree. Okay, just real quick. So EU profile, there's 27 member countries, encompasses 500 million people. Keep in mind there's about 300 million people in the US. So there's only 200 million more across the European continent. 7.3% of world population, 20% of global output, 17.3% of global merchandise trade. And the euro is used in 17 member countries and by some other countries as well. Okay. So EU's impact on international business. The changes harmonized national standards, labeling laws, testing procedures, and consumer protection issues. Eliminated shared border taxes and custom laws of member nations. Introduced common currency, the euro. The results, world's largest trading economy. Foreign direct investment outflow equals about 20%, 26% of world output. Cost of doing business in EU is reduced, and EU regulations set new global standards. So let me that is where we are at, and I really hope that screen share worked. but I will also do my best to get the PowerPoints to you as well in case that didn't work. And hopefully I didn't look too crazy if those slides weren't up there.